I'm joined now by Elizabeth Nolan Brown. She's a senior editor over at Reason Magazine, and we're going to talk about the strange connection between Hannah Nealman over at Ballerina Farms and, get this, Usha Vance. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us. The article that made me want to talk about this topic with you, Elizabeth, was excellent. This was about Usha Vance and the Ballerina Farm controversy, both of which sort of happened at the same time. It's a fascinating piece, and you have this broader point about the media coverage of Hannah Nealman of Ballerina Farms, and I kind of want to start there. What struck you as you were kind of consuming recent media coverage of Nealman, who's super popular in the sort of trad wife sphere? She doesn't identify as a trad wife, but recently was profiled. And as you were reading all of this, what stood out to you, Elizabeth?
Yeah, there was this Times of London profile about her, and it seemed both the journalists that wrote the profile and then especially the public reactions to that profile were just wildly speculative. They just sort of took these very basic facts that were the relatively neutral facts about Hannah Nealman, the girl's life, and sort of ran with them in this direction that portrayed her as this tragic figure whose dreams of being a ballerina had been dashed, whose husband was controlling her and forcing her to have kids every 9 months and not use medication when she gave birth, and just all these things. And there really wasn't anything in the text that necessarily supported those conclusions. And it was just sort of almost as if people, were writing fanfic about her. Like they wanted to believe that she was miserable for whatever reason. So just a truly bizarre reaction to this profile that was, pretty benign.
And it's kind of funny or amusing, I guess, also to imagine a Times of London writer dropping into Utah, where I think Nealman is based and Ballerina Farms is, and try to understand what's happening through this context of feminism, because there has to be an argument in which Nealman's life, in a sense, is sort of the feminist goal or the dream, which is that she's doing what she wants to.
Right. I mean, she has this business that is incredibly successful, that she is the public face of, that she, by all accounts, like makes, creative decisions for along with her husband. They run a farm together in addition to this sort of internet influencer business. She's a beauty queen and a mom. I mean, she's sort of doing, proverbial, having the proverbial all. She's having her career, she's having her family, she's getting to do all of this stuff on her own terms. And yeah, I mean, it's sort of weird that no one would view that as feminist just because she also is being a wife and a mother at the same time as she's running this amazing business.
Right, yeah, and the business part of this is such a good point too. Like if we were looking to see whether she has agency and whether she's like maximizing her agency as a woman, even the profile writer in the Times of London piece is very clearly noticing that she is overseeing like this burgeoning empire that has made her family millions of dollars. I mean, her husband's wealthy, is born into wealth, but at the same time, it's so clear that she is actually exercising even outside of the domestic sphere. And this is one of the points that you make is really interesting, is that can the domestic sphere also become as Mary Harrington has written as well, can it also become the sort of commercial sphere? And isn't that really peak feminism, is like a woman that you can really combine both of those things and monetize them essentially?
Yeah, and it's really funny because she went to Juilliard as a ballerina, and she ended up graduating from Juilliard, but then giving up her ballet career pretty soon after she got married because she was pregnant very soon after that. And everyone has made like so much of this and being like, oh, like she gave up on her dreams. But as also many other people have pointed out, especially Kat Rosenfield and Phoebe Malspobi did a podcast that I listened to about this too. And they were saying, ballet is not exactly this feminist utopia, right? Ballet is this thing where you have to have this very specific body type, and everyone is sort of controlling exactly how you look and exactly what you do. And then by the time you're in your early 30s, like your career is done. So this idea that like, oh no, she didn't choose that path and she chose to be a mom and run her own business and be an influencer and have a farm, it's not clear that that being a ballerina would have been the much more feminist, much more empowered path. It's a really weird way to look at it.
That's also true because it's, to borrow a term from the left, there's also a very heteronormative sort of industry and profession. So that, I guess, is doubly amusing. Usha Vance was subject, and Melania Trump, memorably, to these constant narratives about they must be unhappy. They're categorically unhappy Usha Vance at the RNC had her arms crossed. I mean, she did look uncomfortable, but she doesn't seem to be sort of like personally unhappy at all. Can you tell us a little bit about how there's maybe a similar narrative developed around Nealman, Vance, Melania Trump, and where it comes from?
Yeah, and it's funny when you say that Usha Vance, people made so much of her looking unhappy in some of these, off moments at the RNC convention. Like I have RBF as some of my people might know it. I won't say the full word, but if you catch me just like when I'm not specifically supposed to be looking like I'm engaged, I'm gonna look like all the time. So, like maybe Vance was just like, that's what her face looks like when it's resting. It's so crazy that people, again, yeah, ran with this flimsiest of evidence. And they were like, oh, she's unhappy. She doesn't want to be JD Vance. She doesn't want to be a political wife. She doesn't want to have quit her job so he can be running for vice president. He's controlling her. He's making her do this. The campaign's making her do this. And it's like, she was a very high powered lawyer. She did just quit her job when he became the vice presidential nominee for Republicans. But again, there's no evidence that she, didn't want to do that. Again, we don't necessarily have evidence that she does, but we also have no evidence that she's not happy in doing this. And, he always, JD Vance always talks about how she is, she's inspired him. She's helped him become the person he is. So it seems really like they are a political team. And again, we had this situation where there was really no evidence that she was being controlled, that she didn't want this. And yet a lot of people on the internet were sort of taking away her agency and imagining her as this tragic figure being controlled by a man. And like, you mentioned Melania Trump also. And it just seems like this is this thing that happens frequently with conservative women where, progressives or leftists or feminists online sort of make up these versions of them in which these women have no agency, and then they sort of run with that. And it's very strange because it's almost as if some of these women on the left can't imagine that a woman could just be conservative, that a woman might just have these values that are very different than their own values, and that's okay. Like women are going to have myriad different values and different sort of lifestyles and things like that, and be okay with that. And there's just sort of an inability, I think, to imagine that amongst some progressives.
It's tempting to kind of chalk that up to a coastal bubble. And you and I were talking before we started filming that we're both originally from the Midwest. And I know you lived in DC for a while, and I've been here for a while. So it's easy to sort of chalk it up to that. But I think a lot of people would listen to this and ask you if maybe even there's something deeper, because it does sound almost like maybe projection or there's some sort of like emotional baggage being brought into the conversation.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's some projection there. I don't know if it's, it's always sort of a stupid errand to try and armchair psychologize, but it almost seems like maybe for some people, they don't like these people's politics, so they want them to be miserable so that they can feel like there's justice in the world. Because if these people really have these totally different politics than them, these politics that maybe some on the left think are bad or evil or whatever, and they're also just sort of thriving, that really offends some people's sense of justice. I think there's another thing where, and this isn't just on the left. I mean, this is a problem regardless of some people's politics, where people see other people's life choices as invalidating their own. It's a really weird phenomenon, but I think people, especially when they're insecure in their own, maybe a little bit insecure in their own life choices, maybe subconsciously, they see other people make these different life choices and still be happy. And they feel like that says something bad about their own choices, and so they need a way to like take those people down a peg so they can prove that they made the right choices. And I think that's something you actually see on the left and the right. I mean, with JD Vance and the whole like childless cat lady thing. Yeah, it seems like there's a little bit of people on the right who are having the same sort of projection where they want to imagine like, oh, like women couldn't just possibly really like Kamala Harris or really be, progressive, really, have liked Hillary Clinton, whatever. They must just be miserable with their lives and want to make other people miserable. And it's the sort of flip side of what the left is doing with Nealman and Vance, which is just saying like, oh, women all want the same thing, obviously. And if they say that they don't want the same thing, it must be because they're, brainwashed or, have a false consciousness or something like that.
And it is true. I mean, there's significant research, especially I'm thinking of like Nordic countries, that show the more egalitarian, Christine Hoff Sommers has written about this before, the more egalitarian a country's policies towards sex and gender tends to be, the more women actually tend to gravitate towards traditional roles. And Nealman actually kind of makes me think about that. I mean, Utah is a state with really high levels of social capital. And, we're the year 2024, women have a lot of rights in the United States. So there does seem to be a tendency in the West, at least, as time has progressed, where women are gravitating towards, like, the whole tradwife phenomena is kind of fascinating through that lens. And again, Nealman doesn't identify with it, but it is strange that this kind of reactionary trend or meme has popped up just in the last few years. It reminds me of some of those studies from Nordic countries in particular that found egalitarianism and traditionalism kind of going hand in hand.
I think that there's always going to be women who want all different sorts of lifestyles, right? Like there's always we're calling them tradwives now, so there's this sort of new attention to them and it seems trendy. But I mean, there's always been stay-at-home moms, stay-at-home wives. There's always been a huge swath of women who want that, who either don't want a career or want a flexible career so that they can have family. And then of course there's always a lot of women who, want to put career first. There's a massive middle of women who are neither tradwives nor these like girl boss stereotypes, like the vast majority of women are just sort of out there, being working moms, not being pretty chill about it. It's not like a huge deal one way or the other. And I just think it's funny because we don't talk about men like this, right? There's no like, oh, do men want this or this, as if men could only want one thing or the other. But with women, we act like all women must secretly want the same thing and not be able to like, be diverse individuals who have tons of different goals and tons of different dreams and values. It's very strange.
It's time to start talking about the childless cat bros, I think is where we're landing.
Exactly.
Couldn't agree more. Elizabeth Nolan Brown is a senior editor at Reason. I cannot recommend following her work closely enough. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was great.
Well, if you enjoyed this clip, please make sure to subscribe to the Undercurrents YouTube channel. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a like, give us a comment. It helps so much. And for premium access, make sure to subscribe at undercurrents.tv. Thanks so much.